Hello, today is Thursday, June 20th, 2019. I'm Joe Schmidt with TC2, and this is Staying Connected. Each quarter, the Federal Communications Commission reveals the Universal Service Fund contribution factor. Late last week, the FCC announced the USF contribution factor for the third quarter of 2019, and it was a huge number, 24.4%. Last quarter, it was 18.8%. This quarter, 24.4%. To explain what's going on with USF, and more importantly, what enterprises can do about this hugely burdensome hit to their telecom bills, I'm joined today by my colleague, Andrew Brown. Andrew is the managing partner of LB3 and the chairman of TC2, and he has been working on USF issues for enterprise customers for well over a decade. I have no doubt that he can get us to the bottom line on dealing with USF matters within the time span of this short podcast.
Oh, I like that. From 0 to 24.4% in 8 minutes or less.
Staying Connected is a high-velocity podcast, so buckle up. Okay, seriously, Andrew, why is the USF factor so insanely high, and why the huge jump from 18.8 to 24.4% just this quarter?
Well, the factor is so high just because of the basic math of USF funding. The current system is structured in a way that effectively requires the contribution factor to go up. And because carriers stick end users with a pass-through surcharge for the carrier's contribution obligations to USF, what end users pay for telecom services also goes up.
So, can you please explain the basic math that you just mentioned?
Yeah, sure. USF is funded by assessing carrier revenues for certain types of services, most interstate and international telecom services. So your toll-free voice minutes of use, your MPLS access, international voice, that kind of stuff. Carrier revenues for those services have been declining for a long time, and they've been steeply declining over the past 5 years. But the amount that USF spends for universal service programs has not really declined. In fact, it's programmed to grow significantly in the coming years. So the basic math that even a lawyer can understand is that to keep the USF coffers filled at current and future levels, the contribution factor has to go up as the assessed revenue base goes down.
But that's not new, is it? As you've just described, this has been a long-term trend for many years now. So why was the jump so significant this quarter? Yeah,
you're right. It's not new at all. The USF contribution factor has always been pretty volatile and can take swings of like 1% or more each quarter. So even though the third quarter 2019 number is big and sets an all-time high, isn't really all that surprising for those of us that follow this. It's not likely to remain the all-time high for very long either, unless something in the system changes. So the nearly 30% increase in the factor from last quarter really just results from the fact that we've probably reached a tipping point in what we affectionately call the USF death spiral. Assessed revenues are shrinking so quickly and expenditures are likely growing that 0.5% or 1% increase from quarter to quarter just isn't going to be enough to make up the funding requirements anymore. The jumps are going to get bigger. And a 29 or 31% contribution factor in the future, if things don't change, that isn't some chicken little the sky is falling rambling of an insane telecom lawyer. It's the basic math I just talked about, and it's coming.
Wow, that's crazy. I first started in this business about 25 years ago, and when I did, USF was really a non-issue for enterprises buying telecom services. Today, it is a completely different story, and USF adds real costs, which companies are under pressure to reduce to meet their budgeted savings targets. Now, when we at TC2, when we develop cost models for our clients, we see the huge impact that USF has on their bottom lines. And honestly, you can't ignore the numbers that might add 20, maybe 25% to what our clients are paying for their telco services. That's frustrating, but what's really frustrating is that the big volatility in the carrier's USF surcharge from quarter to quarter, it makes it really hard for our clients to establish a budget over a fiscal year or over a 3-year deal cycle. So, Andrew, in your opinion, what can companies do to address this problem?
Yeah, it's a big issue for the reasons you pointed out. One appealing approach is just to opt out of the current assessment scheme by purchasing services that aren't assessed USF. So, for example, carrier revenues for consumer broadband internet access are not assessed USF, and the carriers don't pass through any USF surcharge on those services. With the uptake in SD-WAN and internet-first strategies by enterprises, we are seeing enterprises move to a network services model that partially, sometimes significantly, substitutes basic internet access for more expensive forms of access like MPLS. And even though there are some real technical justifications for evolving your network with SD-WAN and internet access, there are also a lot of cost savings that are significant from switching the underlying access model. And those cost savings, at least for now, are even more significant because they don't include assessments for USF. But moving to a different access form because of regulatory fee issues, what we call regulatory arbitrage, is really not the way companies want to make network architecture decisions or even their long-term financial decisions, because there's always a risk that those services will be assessed in the future. So if you move to a different access model solely to avoid regulatory charges, you may end up moving services to avoid assessments only to find they are assessed later.
Okay, so what else can they do?
Well, it's important that our clients and listeners understand that the current system that they are paying to support and that they will pay more and more to support doesn't have to be the system for funding USF. The FCC has been considering alternatives for many years now that could create a more stable, predictable, and fairly funded USF system. But that system will never be adopted unless decision makers in Washington hear directly from enterprise customers that they actually care about this issue and that they cannot continue to support a program that is imposing significant costs on their bottom lines and that directs money away from investment in their products and businesses and their own networks. Otherwise, we're looking at a scenario where businesses will be required to kick in even more to fund this system because they are viewed as the deep pockets USF needs to keep the money flowing to the carriers. And let me just say that the FCC hears from carriers and recipients of U.S. funding almost every day, not so much from businesses that have to pay for this system.
All right, so clearly the prospect of even greater contribution obligations, that's pretty scary. But how do companies do that? How do they get their voice heard? Most of our clients are managing their networks and their budgets, and they don't spend their time working on policy issues in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, I hear you. We get that. Not everybody is living this stuff the way that we do. And there are ways we can help. First of all, most of our listeners need to educate their management about the significant costs USF is imposing on their company's IT budgets and to make addressing this issue a priority. It's not on the radar screen for everyone, even though it's a big number. So to help, we're going to host a short conference call sometime in early July to brief this issue for listeners and their management chains that want to attend. And as part of that briefing, we're going to provide specific steps that companies can take, working through their Washington, D.C. policy offices and trade associations to which their companies already belong, working through established membership groups like the one that we represent, the Ad Hoc Telecom Users Committee, which represents enterprise customers at the FCC. And lastly, reaching out directly to the FCC with a very basic letter or communication, which we will help facilitate, that lets the FCC know this is an important issue for enterprise customers. Getting the message out for enterprise customers is super important and only requires a tiny bit of effort, which we want to make a lot easier.
Okay, that's excellent. And thanks so much, Andrew, for your insight. Now, be on the lookout for a communication about this upcoming briefing and USF action plan. And Andrew, I assume folks can reach out to you if they are interested in more information about USF and the Ad Hoc Telecom Users Committee.
Yeah, definitely. They can find my contact info at lb3law.com or email me directly at abrown@lb3law.com. I'd be happy to discuss any of this further.
Okay, thanks again, Andrew. As Andrew mentioned, don't hesitate to reach out to him directly about this issue or simply get in touch with one of the TC2 or LB3 professionals that you know or that you regularly work with to talk about USF or if you have other ICT lifecycle needs. Now, there's also more information about USF and issues facing enterprise customers on the LB3 and TC2 websites at lb3law.com and TechCaliber.com. Also, be on the lookout for further information about the upcoming USF briefing that Andrew mentioned. Now, we're going to continue our discussion about a related issue, the other non-government imposed surcharges that carriers layer onto customers' bills. And these can add an additional 5 to 10% in fees on top of the 25% you're already paying in USF. So stay tuned for the second part of our discussion on fees and surcharges in an upcoming podcast. Finally, you can stay current by checking out those websites that I mentioned or follow us on LinkedIn.